I think something like, a TikTok, probably just showing my age here, but, that has become, one of our most effective conversion sort of channels or platforms. And I think it's because our content game is relatively strong, and we're really thoughtful about when we kind of layer in sort of a sales message. So we're, every, bit of, paid advertising or media is connected to our database. So kind of one kind of view of everything, and its kind of performance and engagement and all of that. But we're, pretty focused on if we're not testing something at any one given, you know, point in time, I'd say we probably aren't doing our job as well as we need to. So we're pretty relentless about that.
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today.
Hey everyone, my guest today is Pete Jung, CMO of NASCAR. Pete began his career on the agency side of the industry in media planning and buying before moving into media, working at publications like Time and Fortune. Following that, he spent a decade at MasterCard as VP of Global Consumer Marketing, and is now approaching a decade at NASCAR, where he has led the brand and the business as the CMO over the last couple of years. Almost all of you will have heard of NASCAR, but you are going to be very interested to hear how they have been intentionally evolving the brand and the business over the time that Pete has been there. And obviously he has played a big part in that. The thing that's most fascinating to me is how they have really driven and put a stake in the ground, to be honest, around making NASCAR a more inclusive sport. And for any brand that's at the scale of NASCAR, it's a hard thing to shift perception, to shift audience, to shift the culture around your brand. And it really seems like, from what we hear from Pete, that they're really starting to do that. So there's a lot of exciting things, both with what they've done over the last few years, how they've approached certain conversations, certain cultural shifts within the US and decisions that they've made around that, but also some things that are on the roadmap, including, and depending on when this is released, it might already be out, but an original Netflix series called Full Speed. So there's so much good stuff in here from Pete. I know you're going to really enjoy this episode like I did. I will let you get to it. Please enjoy my conversation with Pete Jung of NASCAR. Pete, thanks so much for making the time to come on the show. It's great to see you. How are things in Charlotte?
Things are great. It's a little gray and chilly, but no snow. It's just a typical kind of January day here. But gearing up for the 2024 season down in the convention center, which our building is attached to, is the annual driver kind of production and content days. So we're got all the drivers coming through various sort of content captures, and then at the end of the week we induct 3 more people into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. So we're already off and running in 24.
Awesome. I have to say, and full disclosure, we've done a little bit of work with your partnerships team, which has been amazing. I mean, first of all, just the people have been amazing, but also just getting to know the sport and the business and the world of NASCAR over the last few months has been really interesting for me. And as you can see, I'm a fanboy over here now with the 75th edition car that I got when I was in Charlotte in November. So yeah, I mean, I look forward to all the conversations and the guests that we have on the show, but this one I'm particularly excited about, especially with everything that's going on in the world of NASCAR in 2024. So let's get into it. A couple icebreakers for you. So the first one that we ask every guest: what is one challenger brand that you're super passionate about right now, and why?
So I'm a self-proclaimed kind of brand geek. I think and read probably way too much about just brands and their connection with people or whatever the audience or their customer is. One that I really find interesting is probably a bit kind of niche. Actually, not so much niche is Stanley. So Stanley has been around since 1913. And they made the kind of vacuum stainless steel insulation kind of thermal mug, like obviously decades before, many of the leaders in that space, the Yeti and Arctic, who are, within probably 15 years old. So you've got this kind of, this rooted historic kind of brand that's over 100 years old. And, they've got these kind of modern sort of, I would say, disruptors that are coming out with products and loads of marketing, investment. And I think Stanley, I don't know this for sure, but from what I've said and read, that they were kind of like, hey, this is kind of our turf. And I think the way that they have really kind of gained market share and awareness through, scarcity of the product and through product innovation, they've gone, viral in a lot of their content platforms like TikTok. It's become like an accessory from everyone from celebrities to people that are in, personal fitness to nurses to teachers. And I just think that that's a good example of a brand that they're, being around for over 100 years, I think has paid off. And I think a different way that they're kind of going to market has served them well. And I would imagine they're gaining a good bit of market share with some of the other brands in this space.
So I was smiling because Stanley is actually a brand that we've been talking about a lot internally over here. Obviously, everything that happened, whatever, a couple months ago with that, viral campaign or whatever that they had. But also, our whole thing is challenger brands, but really broader than that, it's category change and category disruption. And that category, also as a quick side note, as now a 10-year expat in the UK, going back to America every Christmas and every summer and just going to like the Targets and the Walmarts of the world and just seeing just how insane that category has become with like 40-ounce mugs and things like that. It is really interesting seeing America through kind of like a European perspective at this point. But anyway, we've been talking a lot about that. And obviously everything that Yeti has done to build like a pretty premium brand within that category. So I think we might be doing kind of like a brand breakdown on them, but we're also with this kind of share of search tool that we built called Curo, because there's a pretty strong correlation between share of search, increase in share of search within a category to then gaining market share. And so what we're looking at is the kind of spike for Stanley in the last few months, how sustained that's going to be versus kind of like a flash in a pan and then it kind of reverts to the norm. So great answer, very topical for us. Fascinating category with everything that's going on right now.
Very much. I would imagine for every one water bottle that a European has, the American probably has 4 or 5 of them.
So you did, when we had our prep, well, I guess it was a prep meeting when I was over there, I always ask, what's the thing that you're super passionate about, just to kind of get a sense of the perspective and approach that you take to things. And you did mention that, as you just said, about the connection between people and brands. I think it's also on your LinkedIn. What does that mean to you? I mean, maybe there's the obvious answer, but I'd love for you to just unpack that a little bit and maybe how it's kind of guided your career to date.
I think everyone's sort of interpretation or definition of a brand, probably varies a bit. I think one of the most common words to, explain a brand is your story. And I really think of like the story of a brand and a relationship between a constituent, constituency, a business, a group of people, a group of customers. And I think when I was at my previous company or brand that I worked for, MasterCard, I got to a point in my career where I really, through research and through, different activations and partnerships, I just saw, like the possibility of people's connection with a brand and how powerful that could be, and obviously you want that powerful in a positive way, that it translates to, sales or a relationship, but it's powerful also, that it could work the other way. Right. And I think that brands are so kind of vulnerable now because consumers have so much power, with their voice. But I got to a point where I really wanted to represent a brand that was established, but a brand that had so much opportunity that I felt to evolve, but still stay true to, to what it is and their purpose and why kind of they exist. And, admittedly, I was not a huge NASCAR fan. I love sports. I love cars. So I figured it couldn't have been that far fetched. I went to my first race the spring of 2014, and I was hooked. But I really feel like, as a brand marketer and someone that's passionate about the relationship, I've hit kind of the jackpot, because I really believe that NASCAR as a brand and the fans, there's such a powerful relationship that, that is rooted in kind of, community and connectivity and inclusiveness. And that's just made me even more passionate about that sort of notion of brands and people and the relationship.
So I think that's a perfect segue to, I promised myself I wouldn't do any puns. This one wasn't intentional, I promise. But let's shift gears and talk about, sorry, I'm sure you hear that all the time. I just fell right into it. Anyway, let's talk about the NASCAR brand and business. So I think, first of all, a lot of people, even people who are relatively informed, like myself, sports fans, Americans, I guess kind of into cars, maybe not so much more than the next guy. But anyway, probably don't really know the scale and the just kind of state of where the NASCAR business is right now. And I think picking up on some of those things that you said at the end, and I know this was the other question, but I'm kind of molding them together, just the kind of transition and evolution that the brand has been on, if we look at the last 10 years or so that you've been there. Because I think, what you said of, diversity, evolution, like those are probably words that most typical people, casual sports fans who maybe aren't that close to the NASCAR story, wouldn't necessarily associate with the brand of NASCAR. So where are things today, and what has the journey of the last 10 years looked like?
Yeah, when I joined NASCAR in 2014, NASCAR was coming off of its peak of popularity in the early 2000s. And truthfully, a lot of our, business, performance indicators were softening. And, candidly, my first couple of years here, and my first job was to really primarily focus on cultivating new fan relationships, those that better represented the global population, but even the U.S. population, younger, more diversity, just representative of the U.S. and some areas where we're candidly we under-indexed. When I kind of started working on this kind of opportunity or this challenge, it was really obvious that it wasn't necessarily a marketing issue per se. It was really more of a relevance issue. And there were some bigger fundamental things that needed to sort of happen in order for us to open the door for new people to kind of consider NASCAR and even want to learn more about what it's all about. And I'd say really probably in 2019, 2020, those were, I think, kind of the start of what I would say were really have been the most transformational years of the sport or the company in our 76-year existence. Going back to 2020, I think how we as an industry kind of navigated the pandemic, being the first, major sport, back to competition. Obviously, our athletes are, in fire suits and helmets and in cars. So we had some things working for us. But the way that we kind of navigated that, the way that we kind of leaned into things like iRacing, where, we're basically continuing our season, but doing it electronically with our drivers and going to the tracks we would have been at, but doing it all virtually. And then another kind of big moment in 2020 was just the tensions in the U.S. here around sort of social justice, and George Floyd was a big moment, and around that time we made a stance to no longer allow the Confederate flag at our events, and I think really just propped up sort of our commitment and investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that was a big moment too. It opened up, a lot of people to be like, huh, all right, I may want to learn more. There's more to this. And then from there, there's just been a lot of kind of innovation and I think thoughtful sort of change. Definitely not steering from what we are. Our purpose is to excite people, to bring them together, and to entertain people through racing, which is, I think, that one of the purest forms of competition. But in the last couple of years, we've had major changes to our schedule, the markets, the type of tracks, the event experience. We introduced an all new car in 2022 that has made the racing even better, kind of more parity and opportunity for you know all the cars and drivers in the field to have an opportunity to win. Close racing, which is what people love about NASCAR racing. And also that the data and information that comes off of the car is in a whole other kind of world as well. So there's as much kind of value in the information you can get off of this as a companion kind of experience to seeing it live or watching a broadcast. Even things like the format of our racing, introducing stage racing. So it's no surprise that younger people tend to have a shorter attention span. And looking at our format where we have these kind of key moments where people may tuned in or dial up their sort of engagement. So a lot of things that are fairly transformational. I'd say that we're still in that. I think you're going to see even more change when it comes to our schedule and more kind of bold changes in 2025 and beyond. You're going to see kind of more evolution and variety in our experience. But I think most importantly, just people seeing NASCAR as really an inclusive kind of community in sport. And then I think that the things that we really need to tackle is people gaining a better understanding of what this kind of crazy sport is all about. There's a lot more to it than making left-hand turns. And I think that's probably something that we collectively as an industry, we as a company, we as a marketing team haven't done a great job until now and going forward. So
it's fascinating. And even going back to what you said of when you left MasterCard and kind of looking for an opportunity, because there's, I don't know what the ranking is, you probably do, but NASCAR as a brand in the US has tremendous scale and awareness. Like everybody knows NASCAR, and there's so much opportunity, but at the same time a big challenge of taking what people already know, which is great on the one hand, one of the benefits of being a big incumbent in the space, in the sector. But then you kind of have to, you're not building from scratch in terms of people's association with the brand. You have to kind of turn the oil tanker, as it were, which is really hard in terms of changing people's perception when something is at that size. And the other thing that's interesting, we've had a few guests on the show from broader sports, and a lot of what I call challenger brands within sports, Formula E, pickleball, world chase tag, some really interesting things. And I think sports is really interesting because we think of it as pretty static. In America, you've got football and you've got NASCAR and you got baseball and basketball and all that. And those are just at massive scale. They are pretty entrenched incumbents. And so it doesn't look like it's changing, but beneath the surface every year, attention is shifting to new and different places. And so you see some of the headlines about baseball putting in all these rules to make the game shorter. I think the NFL has done a lot around diversity and inclusion and trying to reach more of a female audience in particular. And I think it's just, I'd just be curious to kind of get your thoughts on, if we zoom out for a second and just think of the changing nature of the sports category over the next 10 years. Do you think about that dynamic of like challenger brands that maybe aren't the next NASCAR or whatever, but competing for people's time or downtime or their association with a brand or an athlete? Like, does that factor into any of how you think about it?
Yeah, 100%. Even if you look at more niche or emerging sports, I listened to the gentleman from World Chase Tag, and that's fascinating. That's also another very pure sense of kind of competition. But you mentioned pickleball, and even outside of sports, I mean, if you go back just a couple decades ago, if you thought of how people spent their time or had the opportunity to spend their time, on a Tuesday afternoon, let alone a Saturday or a Sunday, it's tough. You're competing with TikTok and YouTube and pickleball, and it's so much more competition, and just people vying for people's attention. So I think we've become pretty obsessed with just the customer or fan experience. Certainly, the best experience is being there live, and I think that is something that I would say we got to get you to a race too, Eric, this year. But I would say it really is unique from other sports and entertainments. Think just the level of community when you see groups like the campers and the tailgaters, it's like a multi-day kind of event for many of our fans, and it's unique. And I think that's the thing is staying true to who we are and our purpose and what we're kind of all about, but also like really making sure that your proposition to fans is different enough that they're like, you know what, instead of going down a black hole with TikTok, which I could do, I'm going to spend a couple hours with NASCAR on Sunday. You better have a pretty dang good kind of proposition. So we think about it all the time. I think we're humble about just where and how kind of competition emerges. I think it's well beyond sports, but certainly look at both major sports, but also emerging sports too. And I think that just keeps us, it's got to keep us on our game to like always be relentless about what can we introduce, or what can we evolve, or what can we enhance, or whatever, to make sure that that proposition is as strong as it needs to be for people to spend a couple hours with you each and every week.
I really do think that's important for any category. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more obvious talking about your business and sports of like, it's not just other sports, it's attention. But I think, having that more broad perspective of where your quote unquote competition is, because it might not be for the dollars, it might be for people's time as well. So let's talk a little bit about kind of your role as CMO over the last 9 years. One of the things I loved about what you said when we met is you're like, hey, I don't only want to talk about the good things, I want to talk about some of the learnings as well. But let's do both. Let's keep it balanced. So your approach and kind of priorities over the last 9 years in this CMO role, what are some of the biggest things that stand out in terms of what's gone well for you in your approach, and what maybe you've learned from and could have gone better, you're doing differently going forward?
Yeah, I mean, so much has changed in 10 years with this role in particular. And I've been in the CMO role for maybe two years or so. But it is so different, Eric, from my early days. Like the marketing team or brand team was a fairly small, group, and they put out some really nice television and radio ads. Worked with some, more of kind of a traditional sort of agency relationship and logos, and it was very kind of specific. And marketing today is research and insights and data. It's our industry relations, it's entertainment, it's influencer, it's media, brand, performance marketing. One of the biggest changes is NASCAR in 2019 came together with ISC, which owns a lot of the major track properties where we race in the U.S. Daytona International Speedway being one of them. And so now, we're accountable. We're commerce is a huge priority for us, selling tickets. And so that has totally sort of transformed the way that we're structured, our capabilities. We call it sort of, our customer fan sort of journey. Everything that we do is much more, purposeful and thoughtful. Every engagement, the channel, the message. If you go back a few years ago, like, we just what we call kind of spray and pray and send an email to everyone or whatever. And so that is that's fundamentally different as well. So I think and then you, on top of that, if you look at just the last 10 years and the technology and platforms, digital and social, that we have kind of at our disposal to have a presence, to market, to engage existing customers, prospective customers, it's huge. So it keeps us definitely on our toes. I think one of the things that I think hasn't gone as well, and I'm still a little kind of baffled by it, is like many sports industries, where there are a lot of stakeholder groups. You've got the drivers, and you've got the race teams, and you've got the tracks, and you've got the sponsors. And I think that rightfully so, what I've learned is that, and experienced, is I think each of these stakeholder groups tends to be so kind of specific about their need and their business, and what they need to be kind of stronger or grow, or whatever the case may be, but kind of looking at it through just sort of their lens. And I'm trying to look at it through more of a macro lens. If we have if we attract more people, and our fan base goes from this to this, and our engagement does the same, everyone has the ability to sort of grow. And that's where maybe I'm an ineffective, salesperson, but I just feel like we haven't been necessarily kind of rowing the same direction until I think this year. I think we're finally to a place where people are like, okay, I see it. If we all work on, getting more fans, a lot through our athletes, through our drivers, it's gonna help us all with our kind of individual or specific kind of business priorities or challenges.
So there's a few things that I wanted to more specifically ask you about in terms of execution and how you've approached it. So one is around how you're approaching new and emerging channels. Second is about younger audience. And the third is about, and you already touched on it, how you've evolved kind of the agency in-house or broader partnership dynamic. So maybe we can kind of work through those, because I think those are all things that people listening can relate to and are trying to figure out in their own way. So first, when it comes to new and emerging channels, what's been your approach to that?
I think we, always testing. And I think now that, that there's so much, you can learn so much just, with data, and, a lot of our marketing is performance based. So, it's just, I probably wouldn't even call it emerging anymore, but, I think platforms like Meta, there's just, so many new products, so many new opportunities that literally every year, every couple months, it seems like we're testing a new, product or service. I think something like, a TikTok, I'm probably just showing my age here, but, that has become, one of our most, I'd say most effective conversion sort of channels or platforms. And I think it's because our content game is relatively strong, and we're really thoughtful about when we kind of layer in sort of a sales message. So we're, every, bit of, paid advertising or media is connected to our database. So kind of one kind of view of everything, and its kind of performance and engagement and all of that. But we're, pretty focused on if we're not testing something at any one given point in time, I'd say we probably aren't doing our job as well as we need to. So we're pretty relentless about that.
And what about an kind of expanding the audience, as you talked about before, specifically with trying to reach and influence a younger audience? I would imagine that overlaps a little bit with the channel strategy, but how do you think about that more broadly?
Absolutely. I think, when you look at diverse consumer segments, the African American, the U.S. Hispanic market. I think you go back to my early days here, and many conversations, many focus groups, and 9 out of 10, if you're talking to a consumer in that was represented in one of these segments, they would just be like, I don't see myself in NASCAR. I just don't see it. I don't see diversity. Fast forward to 2024. Whether it's our drivers or the pit crews or the owners or the sponsors or the talent on TV, the representation of diversity is on a different level. I think that, and still so much, work and opportunity to make it even more diverse. But I think that the it's really important that we have partners that help kind of extend the story in a very genuine way. So partnerships like Blavity and Me Too, that this is not just an ad buy. This is content. This is talent. This is, so, taking the entire sort of season and our events and our athletes and really engaging with their massive audiences. And it's just a very different sort of, approach, less kind of, typical, advertising, and more original content, different experience platforms that are kind of tailored or inspired by these diverse consumer segments, and then partnerships. Which I think, and you got to look at like the long game, right? This is not something that we're genuine about forging these relationships. This is not like we want this to happen in 2024. This is going to happen over years. And finally, starting in 2020, 21, you see the composition of multicultural fans really starting to uptick, which is great to see, both in terms of just claiming to be fans, but buying tickets, watching races, downloading the app, following us on social media. So we're making some really good progress, but still so much opportunity ahead of us.
And so when it comes to the in-house and external structure, it sounds like that's evolved in the time that you've been there. So be curious to understand how you've approached that. Have you intentionally shifted to bring more of the marketing and the creative or other functions in-house? And then certainly one of the things that I'm picking up from what you just said, or at least to take away from me, is to think more broadly about content production and where it can come from. It doesn't need, just because it's a creative agency doesn't mean that they need to do all your content. A lot of these partnerships that you're doing, whether it's with media outlets, influencers, I know you're doing a lot in the kind of the creator space as well. A lot of it, when it comes to kind of feeding the media and marketing machine, there's a lot more opportunity if you think more broadly about it.
Yeah, early on in my days at NASCAR, we worked with one of the largest agencies and part of a holding company. Probably the last 5 years or so, we work with primarily our external creative and advertising is very small, independent kind of boutique shop, all ex agency folks, creative and account, but all have a lot of experience in sports. And I think even more so, just the pace at which, we're trying to tell our story and capitalizing on opportunities. If something happens in the Daytona 500 that we need to jump on, it's not the most efficient or the most effective for us to necessarily go brief, an agency and have them come back in a few days or a few weeks with sort of a concept. It needs to be more like real time and iterative. So one of the things I'm really excited about is a few months ago, we launched our new productions headquarters, which is just a few miles up the road here. And it is total state of the art production, content, studios, cameras, everything. And I think we will be doing more working with an entity called NASCAR Studios that's led by my colleague, the Chief Digital and Content Officer, to tell kind of our brand story and have this brand and event kind of creative done more in-house. I just think it's kind of a necessity in being really quick to market. I also think that there's just there's something where having people that really understand kind of the brand essence and the soul and of everything, and not only NASCAR, but what is it about the Daytona Internet or the Daytona 500 that is raw, that you can't really explain unless you've been there. And I think that helps when you have people that have experienced it or are part of the immediate kind of internal teams.
So you've already touched on a couple of the exciting things that are coming up for NASCAR in 2024, but I know there's more. So if we talk about kind of the road ahead, I know you have an exciting Netflix show coming out that I am definitely looking forward to watching. So let's talk about Full Speed. Let's talk about the new media rights deal, which y'all announced recently. What are you super excited about when we think about 2024 and beyond for NASCAR?
I truly am. I know this sounds cliche, but I would not have said this last year. If I would say I'm excited for the 75th year of 75th anniversary of NASCAR, but I am more excited this year and bullish about the season ahead and years ahead than any of the 9 previous years that I've been here. The Netflix show Full Speed breaks on January 30th, so get ready to do some serious binge watching. I don't, if we had a dollar for everyone that asked, us like, hey, that Formula One show, Drive to Survive, NASCAR should do something like that. And listen, it worked, it worked huge for Formula One. And I think we have a lot of respect and admiration for Formula One and all of our motorsports kind of brethren. I think that our approach to the Netflix show and our approach to everything was not just like, okay, let's go do our show or whatever, but to really think through, well, who would we partner with? Who would our production partner be? And are they the right one? And what's the right point in time? And we've got these distractions, so maybe we should hold off and start shooting at this point in time. So there's a lot of anticipation. I think people are like, we should have been doing this years ago, but I think actually the time is perfect. So I don't want to give anything away. I think, I'm sure I'm biased, but I think the people that have seen snippets and some of the, trailers and a sneak peek at the first season, I think people are blown away. And what I'm most excited about is it really gets to this kind of notion of people getting a better understanding of what it's all about, right? These are, and again, it's so hard to explain and, certainly in a 30-second TV spot or even, a broadcast on NBC. Just what's going through the mental and physical preparation. I mean, these drivers are like gladiators. They're like ordinary people, but they're doing extraordinary things. And I think sometimes, like, we're so like humble as a sport and a culture. We're just like, oh yeah, they're going really fast and they're making these crazy wrecks, and he just flipped 8 times and got out of his car, walked out of his car, whatever. But it's unlike anything else, honestly. And so what I think that the show does is really start to kind of put into perspective, who are these people? What's their persona? What is Danny Hamlin like when he's, on his dock up on Lake Norman, and, what's going through his head as he's preparing for the upcoming weekend and competing in the playoffs and all of that. So I think it's going to be a huge kind of asset for us to engage with, an entirely new audience. And I think people just get a better understanding and appreciation, and hopefully that will translate to people being like, NASCAR is coming around this spring. I may go check it out for the first time. And then the onus really is on us to make sure that we're kind of nurturing that relationship. And, how do you identify with the driver, and how do you become more of of an active fan? And do you, or is betting something you'd be interested in? Do you want to play fantasy live and all that, all kind of the companion experiences? You hit on kind of the new media rights. We made that announcement back in early December. Another huge milestone and great moment. I think it's just wild considering the ever-changing and very fast change of pace of the media landscape. And what was encouraging is that the number of people that were just interested in NASCAR media rights, very different place than it was our last media rights deal, which was 10 or so years ago. But the fact that, we will continue to work with our existing partners at Fox and NBC, who are tremendous partners. But then you've got Warner Brothers Discovery, you've got Amazon, you've got CW that are all new to the party. And if you just think of their, expertise and their assets and their, connections and all of that, I think 2025 is just going to be another really big year in terms of how we're broadcasting our races. I think a lot of things are going to be fundamentally different. The CW actually has the entire season of the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and we're going to work with them on the live production of that. So we're going to have influence on the talent and the format and the graphics and all of that, which I think is just going to be a game changer. So that's a huge moment. I think happy for our leadership to kind of have that behind us, so we can really focus on growing the sport and all the fun stuff.
By the way, as a side note, I don't know if you listened to the New York Times daily podcast, but they just had an episode about Sunday Night Football and just kind of how incredible it is, just how it dominates the TV landscape in America and has for so long. I think some people know that, but what they talk about, and I think it's part of like a much longer piece that's coming out, is just how much money and time and craft goes into producing that broadcast. So I've always been fascinated by football as a fan, but also just the business of football. And I think you'd probably be interested, if you haven't already, in just kind of digging into how they've done that, NFL overall, but particularly the Sunday night one. I just want to go back real quick to kind of what you were saying about the Netflix series and what you think it's going to do for the brand and business, because I actually connected that to what you said at the beginning about what you're passionate about in your drive for your career of connecting people to brands. And, that show, especially if we take kind of Drive to Survive as an example, or really anything that kind of tells a human story around a brand or a business or the individuals that make up a sport, it just gives people more to connect to. And I think that that's an interesting I was sitting here saying, I think that's an interesting thing to draw out for our people listening. How can you broaden the base on which you present a platform for your brand to connect with people, which is probably going to be more through a human and an emotional connection rather than anything else. But I was also thinking that's an interesting challenge for us at Rival, a little bit different B2B services than, of course, what you're doing. But I really like that. And that's certainly going to be one of my takeaways. I know that we are really up on time. So we got 4 minutes left. I'd love to go through a quick lightning round to finish things up if you are up for it. So kind of quick 1-sentence or 2-sentence answers to these. Can you tell us about the first marketing job that you ever had?
Assistant media planner at an agency in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Carmichael Lynch. Worked on Harley Davidson and American Standard. So motorcycles and toilets.
Love it. What's the best piece of career advice you've ever received?
This was from a mentor of the late Pat Fallon, but he just was very, and I didn't even work super close with him, but he was so influential in my kind of career early on, and it was really about how you go about things is oftentimes more important than what it is that you do, and just the importance of relationships and kind of the human touch. Yeah.
Love that. What's the best brand campaign you've seen recently?
Well, I'm going to say one of our sponsors, Ally Bank. I love their campaign, Everyone Needs an Ally. I'm just a big fan of their brand. It probably goes, I have a soft spot for financial services, but I think being a brand that's, I would say, is disruptive, they stand out. They're all about being an ally to their customers. I think everything from their, visual identity to their, experience, they've just got a lot of soul, and I think they're killing it.
What is one marketing tool you can't live without?
I don't know if this is necessarily a marketing tool. It feels like more like a sales tool, but Tableau, I'm fairly obsessed with it. So all of our ticket sales and database is kind of connected through Tableau, and I'm fairly obsessed with being on that every day and looking kind of trends and, campaigns dropping and how that correlates to sales and stuff. So I'm going to go with Tableau.
What's one thing people should do differently after listening to this episode?
I'd say, first of all, watch Full Speed, and I just say give NASCAR a chance. I think that a lot of perceptions of the sport and what it's all about, but give it a chance. There's a lot more interesting stuff to it than cars going left.
We've got a bonus question for this lightning round as well. What's your favorite moment from Full Speed, to the extent you can share without giving things away?
Man, I don't want to give anything away. I think my favorite moments probably are moments with the drivers that are away from the track, that I think make them just look like human, but also kind of badass. And I think that's what we need, is to kind of humanize these drivers, but also bring the kind of star power out of them. So.
Well, I am very much looking forward to watching it. And yes, Ralph and the team have already promised to get me to a race at some point. And now that you've also said it, I'm going to hold you all to it. So we will figure that out. And I'm looking forward to it. Pete, thank you so much for your time. Been a really interesting episode. Great to see you.
Thanks so much, Eric. It was a pleasure.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a marketing innovation consultancy that helps businesses develop strategies and capabilities to grow faster. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and please do leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.